Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spoil Your Baby podcast. I'm so excited to be here today with Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. She's a former psychologist and now a parenting educator and a mother. And her and I were lucky enough to spend time together about a year ago in Romania on a wonderful trip. And we're reunited today. So thank you so much for being here.
Feels so good.
Does. It really does. And we're gonna talk about something that I think may be a unique conversation
Mm,
for a lot of parents. It's a place where there's like a lot of confusion, a lot of questions. We're gonna talk about what discipline means for babies, 0 to
mhm.
3, and and touch on why kind of the traditional idea of discipline doesn't really fit with how babies' brains grow and how babies develop. So why don't we start with you? What brought you to this work and in the world of discipline? So
Mhm.
yeah.
I was practicing as a psychologist and also had young children. And I had been trained in what I will define as a very kind of behaviorist approach. You don't like what you're seeing, you squash it. And the
Mhm.
the method that will be deemed successful is whatever one ends up causing the behavior to stop. Right. So there wasn't a lot of consideration for what is happening behind the behavior, what's happening in the internal world. And then I started to notice that the referrals coming into our clinic across all the clinicians, a lot of those referrals are anxiety based
Yeah.
and a child presenting with kind of challenging behaviors. And when we would go through those intakes and look at sort of what was happening for families, it seemed like the discipline was actually causing the anxiety. And
Yeah.
so I started to do a deep dive and I studied a bit with Gordon Neufeld and like a bunch of different things to try and figure out like what's the mismatch here. There's obviously something happening. And
Yeah.
eventually what I came up with is that there is sort of a downstream fallout from how we discipline our children. And that fallout actually creates more disruption for them in in life as the years tick on than if
Mhm.
we were to be able to approach things in a compassionate kind of way. And it's all part of a really interesting school of thought in terms of who children are and how they communicate and how it is that we are meant to interact with that so that they get to go and grow in the way that nature intended, not
Mhm.
necessarily in the way that we think is the path.
Babies are really asking us to fully accept them through
Mhm.
who they are. So that's a huge disconnect for them.
Mm.
And then we have our parents are pressured to have well-behaved
Yeah,
babies.
yeah,
And like, that puts them in a place where they're like, what's the answer? What
yeah.
do I do?
And the problem is, the answer is not what everybody thinks it should be. Like the answer isn't to stop the behavior. The answer is to support the child.
Yeah.
And we do that by retreating to the environment around the child. And so if you think about like the ABCs of behavior, the behaviorist approach is going to focus on the C's. So the A is the antecedent, the thing that comes before the behavior. The B is the behavior. The C
Mhm.
meaning the consequence or the thing that comes after the behavior. Behaviorists are focused on the C. A behavior occurs. I'm going to create some kind of backlash pressure so that
Yeah.
it doesn't occur again by applying what we dress up and call a consequence, but really it's a punishment if we're going to
Mhm.
be just clear about the terminology.
Yeah.
Whereas if you want to really nurture development, then the developmentalists, of which I would say I'm in that club, you focus on the antecedent. It's what
Yeah.
came before. And
Yeah.
so what came before is what's happening in the environment around the child. What came before is it's been a really overstimulating day. What came before is, you've had 6 fights this week with your partner and your child, though maybe not understanding the nature of that is bathed in the energy of that. Like those are all the kinds of things that come before. And we want to just take stock of how is the world around the child and the environment around the child, how is that meshing with who it is that they are and how it is that they're showing up in the world, and is that a fit for them or not? And if it's not, then to understand that our role as the grown-ups is to make it work for the child, to not make the child work for us and for the world around them. The idea is that all behavior is just communication. There's no such thing as misbehavior. And so our job, particularly for a young child, will want to be considering developmentally where it is that they are at and allow ourselves to meet them exactly there. You want to put the bar where they can jump and have success with that, not where they're going to be tripping over it constantly and feeling, at the effect of that. And
Yeah.
so if you have a 2-year-old that's biting, the appropriate response is to provide more supervision so that you can be available to whatever the need is as it arises in the moment.
Yeah.
And of course, in a firm and kind, emphasis on kind way,
Mhm.
you can be communicating what the boundary is or what the expectation is, but do so in a way that you are not deluded into believing that just because you've communicated that it's never going to happen again. Of course,
Yeah.
it's going to happen
You're gonna have
again
to probably say it 100 or 1,000 times, like, more than
at minimum.
yeah. Yeah.
And the road to hell for our littles is not paved with good intentions. There our children can have beautiful intentions, and just by virtue of the fact that they're still figuring it out and they're still going and growing and they're perfection and all of that. But by virtue of the fact that it's all still in flux, they're just not going to be able to hang on to their good intentions. And we can believe in the innocence of who they are, just as we should do for each other,
Mhm.
and come alongside that rather than have to react and squash.
I see some, like, misunderstandings about boundaries and babies a lot. Will you speak to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting word
Yeah.
given the connotation that it takes on. And when we think about babies and who babies are, they are us, like they're an extension of who it is that we are. And so this discussion of boundaries, like if I were to define boundaries more generally speaking, boundaries are meant to keep self within, not to keep somebody else out. And
Beautiful.
so if we think about like what does that mean to a baby? The concept of the boundary then is a meaningless concept because
Yeah.
we are with our babies as a necessary condition that nature bestowed upon us. They're meant to be deeply, deeply dependent on us.
Mhm.
And so I suppose in a way, that if you think about the idea that we're a social species and we live hopefully harmoniously amongst each other with this concept of that there's social norms. We don't walk down the street and bite random people or hit random people or whatever. We have social norms about these sorts of things. We can be providing a gentle reminder. What I often think of, like we just put little guardrails on the bridges that our children are walking across so that our children can feel safe.
Yeah.
They can feel like they're not going to fall off the bridge. And the guardrails are those little boundaries and how we're showing up and how we have, routines in place. And by routines, I mean like ways that we greet one another and ways that we say goodnight to each other or goodbye to each other, or ways that we come to the table together, ways, like ways that we be.
Mhm.
All of this is like what I would talk about as being the way that we be boundaried with our youngsters. So it's not this sort of more commonly held concept of a boundary like I don't want that right now, so you're gonna have to wait or da 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 da. It's
Mhm.
how do I hold myself within so that I can be fullest and most available to those who are counting on me? It's not about being against other or keeping other out. And for our babies, I think we have to be careful about that definition and how we construct it.
Yeah, that's such an important analysis for parents to know because I think there are so many messages out there
Mm,
about having boundaries, even with young babies. And the ways that I see it in the world are just acting to stress babies out even more
yeah.
and get more of that, you know, behavior that parents are uncomfortable with or think is
Yeah.
bad.
I think that, most of the time, the kids that I'm really worried about are the ones who are super well behaved and say crisscross applesauce and,
Mhm.
those are the ones that I'm like, oh, like, here's my card because we're going to need to talk about
Yeah.
12 years from now.
Yeah.
This is not going to go well. There's going to be, so much that had to be squashed down to appease and please the grown-ups around. And in all of that, it's definitely not that I say, oh, just release your children to the flowery meadows and hope for them to bloom. That's
Mhm.
not it at all. And it is that we really need to get down with the idea that this is something to be approached with compassion and humanity and heart and all of those kinds of things so that our children can come through a childhood that they don't have to recover from. And I would go so far as to say that, the mental health crisis that everybody's talking about, a lot of the conflict that happens around the world, like all of this, it could be avoided if we were to listen to our children and show up compassionately. And yes, be firm and put guardrails on the bridge and all of the rest of it, but deliver on all of that with heart.
And it was so good to be with you. And thank you so much for all of your
Oh,
insight and wisdom.
it was lovely. You made it very easy, and I was delighted to get to hang
Oh,
with you. Thank you for having
amazing.
me.
Thanks, Dr. V.